There is a common belief that just because human beings have conceived of the notion of a God, this notion is a necessary concept to contend with. Some feel that because the idea is out there, one must take a position on the matter, or it is perhaps ignorant to oppose this idea in an absolute way as an atheist. The concept of a God, or gods for that matter, is not a necessary thing. In my view, the entire notion is the product of the fertile imagination of human beings. To insist that I contend with this idea is to impose a first cause necessity on me, a thing that I will not concede because it is a capricious notion and not a necessary precondition for any practical consideration in life. If I can live a life devoid of any interaction with a deity, and this notion is simply the product, as far as I can tell, of men's imaginations, atheism, for me, seems thoroughly rational and reasonable. Theism is a failed thought experiment. The category of deity is invented, and it is therefore reasonable to disregard the discussion entirely. Atheism is, or should be, the de facto position, just like a fairyism, or a mermaidism, or a vampirism is. When I left Christianity, I recaptured my right, as it were, to avoid being pulled into absurd and fruitless conversations, endless genealogies, if you will. No longer will I allow people to make me take seriously notions which I find to be without merit. The more outlandish the concept is, the greater a burden it will carry for proving itself. I will not spend my life putting out epistemological fires set off by religious and superstitious pyromaniacs. Brandolini's law. The idea that debunking bad ideas, etc., requires more effort than asserting such will ensure I spend far too much of a relatively short life studying to disprove nonsense if I don't resist bad ideas up front. So, while it is true that one cannot absolutely disprove theism, the same can be said of the concepts of griffins or fairies, but it is ridiculous to say I am agnostic on the existence of fairies. A thing which is non-existent but spoken of as an actual entity will often be walled in from falsifiability by virtue of its non-existence. This says nothing about the strength of the proposition of its actuality, but rather is the accidental state of many fabricated and false claims. Now, back to our story. Having found Brady from Icopod, I now was on the phone daily with him, pulling the nonsense of Christianity apart in private. He was, unlike me, by this time, quite vocal about being a non-believer. I was fascinated by the kinds of interactions he was having with Christians online. I had long ago removed myself from the sphere of Christian dialogue. The insular and myopic discussions I had seen online had driven me away from Christian spaces many years earlier. Brady, on the other hand, took a great deal of delight, I might say, in the back and forth, and was generating good and, at times, fruitful discussions about the intersectionality of faith and politics, along with a myriad of other topics. He was finishing up his book and had sent me a copy asking for my thoughts on it. I believe I read it in a week or two and found it refreshing overall. It also had the effect of reheating the leftover zeal of my deconversion about a decade prior. By the time of the release of his book, Let There Be Gaslight, Christians were engaged in a robust response to the ideas he was discussing in its pages. Ironically, a people equipped with creeds dating back thousands of years and tradition often responded to some of Brady's observations as nothing new. It was as if the idea that restating a fact is somehow an argument against its veracity. There were also quite a few very disingenuous apologetic attempts being posted by a YouTuber in refutation of Brady's carefully presented case. At some point, I took Brady up on the idea of perhaps going public along with him to discuss his book primarily. Brady thought I should be more open about my atheism and had said so months earlier. But it was the religious mob being unfair in their critique of his book that ultimately convinced me to do something. I only insisted that I must remain anonymous. This was the birth of Icopod. We started by carefully working through the critiques coming his way, and after doing so found that we liked the idea of keeping it going. I reached out to Albert, and he was surprisingly up for taking a regular role in our discussions. So, we were busy now being active online discussing everything from presuppositionalism to a RICO case against Yahweh. We had a lot of laughs and were able to mutually encourage one another in our non-faith. After a few years, Brady, having now matured his videographic counter-apologetic chops, urged me to branch off and create original content on my eponymous YouTube channel. And here we are, over a decade after leaving Christianity, online trying to help others. This concludes part 3, the final installment of J-Wit Presents My Faith Was in Shambles, the story of my deconversion. Again, I would like to thank you for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share, as I hope to make this channel a resource for others who find themselves on a similar journey.